The 10th day of the Hebrew month of Shvat is known the world over as one symbolizing the dawn of a new era in the Jewish Odyssey. It was on that date, corresponding to January 17, 1951, the first anniversary of the passing of the 6th Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, that his son-in-law, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, formally accepted the leadership of the Chabad Lubavitch movement, becoming seventh in the dynasty, and propelling the movement and modern Judaism toward the 21st century. On that occasion, the Rebbe outlined his mission statement. Three are inseparable: the love of God, the love of his Torah, and the love of a fellow Jew. One cannot really love Hashem without truly and sincerely loving each and every one of his children, the Jewish people. Every year on this occasion, the Rebbe would humbly and reverently speak of the eternal lessons to be learned from the sixth Rebbe. Presented here are excerpts from several Farbrengens, public addresses, which were held on this auspicious day. The Rebbe spoke in Yiddish, and the translations provided were simultaneous. The Rebbe is known to millions the world over through his thousands of emissaries who run Jewish schools, camps, and social service programs from Chabad outposts in every corner of the world, helping Jew and non-Jew. Here, the Rebbe speaks of an event that set the movement in motion, the well-known proclamation by his predecessor issued upon arriving on U.S. soil.
It's known concerning my father-in-law, whose yahrzeit we mark today, that immediately upon arriving here in the United States, one of the first statements that he made was that he had come here to emphasize, to encourage, and to make people aware of the fact that America is no different than Europe. And therefore, he would continue with all the activities he had been involved with in the old country on the other side of the ocean. There are those who ask the question that it would seem that his coming here to the United States was because he had to leave Europe by divine providence and cross the ocean to these shores because of the Nazi onslaught, as is known, concerning those days, and also how he escaped from there miraculously with the last ship that left that port, which would mean that the reason he came to America is precisely because America is different. And here, one can be safe naturally without miracles. And God prefers that one's safety and security should come also through natural means. And so he came here. And yet the first statement he made was that his being here was not merely for personal safety, but rather to be able to bring with him the message and to make us aware that America is not different, and that this fact should be translated and put into action in the observance of mitzvahs here in the United States. And this seems to be a contradiction. The explanation, however, is that when we look at something externally, only on the surface, or when we look only at the consequences of the final stage or the final result, then we don't get a true picture or a true understanding of the entire matter. And in fact, our conclusion can be completely wrong, from one extreme to the other. Similarly, concerning my father-in-law, the Rebbe's coming to the United States, when we look at it as an independent, isolated event, then it seems to be clear that this was a simple, natural escape to the safety of a country that is in fact different from the circumstances and the countries from which he was escaping. And the United States is indeed different from that country. But when we analyze the main issue, the issue which the Rebbe considered his mission in life and the purpose for which he came into this world, and that is to teach and to spread and to plant the seeds of Judaism. And therefore, wherever he may be, as a soul contained in a body, the emphasis and the main purpose must be consistent with the main purpose for which he was created. And that is to spread the observance of Yiddishkeit. And therefore, that which was his main purpose on the other side of the ocean remains unchanged all through his life. And all his efforts are put into this direction. And since that mission is essential, coming here created no change, but remained exactly the same. The only difference is that there he was able to do that which the conditions of the country permitted, and so there also he devoted himself to the spreading of Judaism under those difficult conditions, and among Jews who found themselves under harsh circumstances with unique challenges. And immediately, upon his arrival in the United States, he proclaimed the essence of his mission, which then permeates all the details of his life, which is the main purpose of his existence, the spreading of Judaism, and the essence of Judaism, which is to unite all Jews as one.
For anyone who participated in a Farbrengen, in person or via television, it invariably left an indelible impression. A Farbrengen would usually last about 5 hours, and the Rebbe would discuss issues ranging from the complexities of Jewish law on a specific topic to Hasidic thought, to current events in the Holy Land and the United States. The Rebbe would speak without notes, and would pause between talks to wish l'chaim, to life, to those present, who would raise a small cup of wine in anticipation of his blessing. In an unusually revealing talk, the Rebbe shared a glimpse of the sacrifices of leadership from a unique perspective, that of an unparalleled leader, and how each person, as a ruler of his own life, should look at his or her leadership position. As always, the Rebbe spoke modestly of his father-in-law's selflessness for the benefit of others. To the Rebbe's admirers and followers, who witnessed the Rebbe's own legendary self-sacrifice, this talk spoke volumes about the Rebbe's leadership.
Jeder Mensch ist erwartet, dass soll werden am Melech, auf seine Dalet Ameis.
Every person is expected to be the ruler and master of his environment, in his own home, regardless of any difficulties. One is obligated to make his or her own home a dwelling place for God. A person who by divine providence was given a mission in a position of influence and responsibility, not only for his personal environment, but for an entire city, he then becomes a leader or king of a city. And one who has influence over an entire country becomes responsible and has the mission to influence the entire country. And then there is the individual, as the Talmud says, one or two people in a generation who stand apart from the rest of the world and are able to influence and brighten the entire world. And here's where the difficulty comes in. No one is born a king or leader over others, only over himself. A person early in life needs to govern only himself and one's immediate environment. But immediately upon becoming bar or bat mitzvah, a boy or girl is given the mission of governing their own little world, the little city, which is the body, to fight off the foolish dictator, the evil inclination, and rather become himself the ruler and master over his or her behavior, replacing darkness with light and bitterness with sweetness. But then, when one assumes responsibility and leadership of a family, he or she is then faced with a difficult transition. He needs to surrender the pursuit of self-improvement when it's in conflict with what is best for the family. For although people are accustomed to doing what is good for themselves, one must recognize the more important responsibility and break this habit of self-improvement in favor of what will be beneficial for the family, so that when there's a conflict and there's a choice to be made between what is good for the individual versus the common good, the person must be ready to make that sacrifice and do what is best for the family. Torah assures us that what is good for the many will ultimately be best for the individual as well. This problem repeats itself when the individual grows into the next stage, accustomed to governing a smaller group, a limited group of people, and protecting its interests, and he does this with all earnestness and devotion. Then any appointment to a greater position where he may lead more people composed of many groups, this brings with it a unique challenge in making that transition. But the person is given the ability and the strength to overcome that difficulty as well, to seek the benefit of the many groups rather than that of the original individual group. And he is given the ability to convince not only himself, but also others that the many groups take precedence over the single group. And so on from level to level, until we reach the level of a king or a nasi, who, as the Talmud says, there is no one above him other than God himself. He must be the consummate leader, although this is not what he's accustomed to, in that his previous humility is now no longer a virtue. As the prophet Samuel condemns King Saul, how can you think of yourself as small when you are the king? Yet by the power of his convictions, he must bring about what is best for the entire land. And since even the most insignificant appointment is decreed from above, from heaven, it is certain that with the new position, he is also given the ability necessary to fulfill the mission properly. This is what we saw in my father-in-law, in the Rebbe, that before he became the leader of Chabad, his main devotion was to care for a smaller circle of people. He then became the head of the entire Chabad Lubavitch movement and devoted himself then primarily to that which is beneficial to all Hasidim, even though he had to give up some of his time that had been devoted to the individual Hasid in the past. Later, when there was a time of distress for the Jewish people, and he became, by divine providence, the leader of all Jews, the Rebbe devoted himself to that which was necessary for all Jews, to print the Aleph-based charts and to make schools that teach the basics of Judaism, even though by doing so, he had to detract time from the teachings of Hasidus and Kabbalah and the most hidden secrets of the Torah.
Each year on Yud Shvat, the Rebbe would dedicate one portion of the Farbrengen to a discussion of the final discourse published by the previous Rebbe, dated Yud Shvat of 1950, the day on which he passed away. The title of this mimer is the verse from King Solomon's Song of Songs, Basi Legani, I have come to my garden, and it speaks of God's endless wish for the human being, and the Jew in particular, to make the world a dwelling place for God, a place where he can feel comfortable and proud of his creation. The Rebbe spoke of how we can learn from the optimism expressed by the previous Rebbe in the mimer.
Und orthodox ist ein Zavo Hero von dem Baal HaHilule.
The instruction and the lesson we can learn from my father-in-law, the Rebbe, who personally suffered so much, facing many dangers, including the 4 life-threatening predicaments for which Torah prescribes a blessing of gratitude upon being rescued, and particularly when even after arriving in the free world, where the problems were no longer political, the Rebbe continued to suffer great spiritual and physical anguish, which we need not elaborate upon. The Rebbe's optimism, in face of all of this, is itself a Torah, a lesson and instruction. For in view of the world's evils, we may become discouraged and think that there is no hope for us to better the world, seeing that from generation to generation and year to year, things seem to be getting worse. And even if we try to continue doing good, by accepting the will of heaven, as the Jewish people do twice every day in the saying of the Shema, but obedience out of accepting the yoke, while convinced that he will certainly not succeed, because the world seems to be a jungle where wild animals reign, then he will do what he ought to do, but this will not provide the enthusiasm or the joy necessary in serving God in general, and particularly the enthusiasm needed to make this world a dwelling place for God. And yet, in his final discourse, Basi Legani, the Rebbe left us with a marvelous message, telling us that this world, the world in which he lived and suffered, is in fact a world that is a garden, a gan, and not a field of grain, which is a basic staple, but a fruit garden, a place of delight, and not a garden belonging to just anyone who might be content with the fruits of the garden being what they are, but we're told that the garden is Gani, a garden which God identifies as his own personal garden, his own personal space, thereby giving it the importance and significance commensurate with the owner of the garden, with God, and not just a garden visited from time to time, but Ganuni, the place in which godliness resides permanently. And then whether we as frail humans can understand or not, since Torah, the Torah of truth, tells us so, and on the day of the Yartzeit, we were reminded of it and again told so, we are left with the message that this world is in fact a garden, regardless of how it may appear to the physical eye, and not a garden of just anyone, but it is God's garden, a place of God's delight. And then, recognizing this essential truth taught by Torah helps us change our view of the world, and from this new perspective, we begin to see beneath the surface, past the surface, knowing what it is that he's looking for, and knowing where to find this truth, past the peel to the fruit within. We begin to see the goodness that is hiding there, the most precious of treasures, the fruits that God himself describes as the fruits of my garden, the garden in which God himself dwells permanently. In view of the preciousness of these fruits, no difficulty and no effort will be too difficult for him, and he will not allow himself to be distracted with things of secondary importance, knowing that there is the greatest of treasures waiting for him, his opportunity to reveal the fruits of God's garden in his permanent dwelling place. This, then, is the lesson that we are to derive from the Yartzeit to inspire us for the entire year, from this day until the 10th of Shvat of the coming year. We need to know that we live in a precious world, and it is only a person's evil inclination, the Yetzer Hara, who tries in various ways to conceal the preciousness that exists in this world, so that we will, God forbid, be discouraged, or go through life only obediently, but without enthusiasm, knowing that this is the function and the purpose of the Yetzer Hara, to conceal the truth and to create false impressions. It is therefore no wonder that the Yetzer Hara would create distractions and excuses. But when we follow the well-trodden path, the way of God, which was revealed to us through his servants, the sages, and in every generation through the sages of that generation, and for us in our times through the Rebbe, whose passing we celebrate today, we can then proceed with certainty, knowing that we will surely find the precious fruits of this garden, of God's garden. May it be God's will that soon, without further effort, since Jews are descendants of kings, and according to Torah, you don't cause a prince to experience unnecessary discomfort or hardship, may the efforts we've invested in the years of the exile be sufficient preparation and the proper vessel in which to receive the great goodness that will come in the times of Mashiach, when the reward will be complete, and may it happen imminently with joy and with enthusiasm.